All right, this is Mr. Singleton, and we're going to be going through this lesson on the idea of elevated language. Some of you may have missed out on this in class, or some of you may just be reviewing this, but either way, we're going to go ahead and get started. One of the things, if you missed it in class, is we watched a clip of an interview with the comedian Dave Chappelle. And Dave Chappelle in this interview talks about how he became successful in his career in comedy and entertainment. He was able to produce movies and an award-winning TV show and great stand-up specials and all this kind of stuff. And you have to have some good connections and make some good business deals to be able to do that. He talks about his journey doing that, and he talks a little bit about language and this idea of elevated language. In the interview, he talks about how very early on in his career, he learned that you had to speak different ways to be heard by different audiences. That he would literally change the way he spoke, the language, maybe not English or Spanish, but the way he spoke English between audiences with his friends that he grew up with in his neighborhood. He would speak a certain way. He calls it street vernacular. He would speak in a way that they would hear him and understand him. And then with the professional community, when he was trying to talk to record executives and TV producers and things like that, he would speak what he calls job interview language. And I think we know what he means when he says job interview language. It's the way we talk when we want to be heard by an audience that's professional or maybe academic in a way that they'll hear us and accept us. Think of it this way. When you're hanging out with your friends, maybe in the cafeteria, and you're speaking with them, you speak to them in a way that they understand and that they hear you. You don't walk up to them and say, "Good afternoon, my friends. How are you doing today? Are your classes going well? That's wonderful to hear." No, you don't talk that way to them because they would think you were really weird. In the same way, you also have to be aware that when you talk to an academic or a professional audience, or you're talking about an academic or professional topic, you need to speak in a way that's appropriate for them to hear you, and that would be a more formal way. Most people who have success at whatever they do understand this idea that there are different ways to communicate to different audiences. So let's get started with this lesson. We're talking about elevated language today because this is going to be really important in this course and as you prepare for college, is understanding both how to read and decode language that maybe is written at a more academic level, and also how to write that way and how to communicate that way in general. So we're going to practice this a little bit today, and hopefully I can prove to you that even when things are written in a really challenging academic way with really elevated language. In fact, the examples we're going to look at today are even kind of exaggerated elevated language. That you can still figure out the ideas that the people writing that are trying to communicate. And I'm going to try to prove that to you today with an activity we're going to try to do here. So let's look at this. Here's how the activity is going to work. I'm going to show you a sentence that is ridiculously difficultly written. It's written in a way that it is meant to throw you off and to kind of probably intimidate you. There are words in each one of these sentences that are words that they intend for you not to understand the exact definition of the word. I'll admit, when I first saw most of these quotes, even as a college graduate and a teacher, there were some of these words that I don't know if I could give you the exact definition of them. So with that in mind, what you're going to do is not be intimidated by these sentences. You're going to look at them, you're going to look at the unfamiliar words, and you're going to look for parts of the word you recognize. For instance, we can look at this sentence, and there's definitely, I know at least two words in here that should probably throw you off. The first is superlative. And when you look at superlative, instead of being intimidated by that word, look at what part of that word you recognize. More than likely you recognize the word super. Something super It's great, right? So if something is the most superlative, a good guess at what that's trying to say is that it's the best or the greatest, right? And you can look down here at this other word, recompense. Recompense, another difficult word. And maybe you do, maybe you don't, but hopefully you recognize a part of this word, right? Compense there might remind you of the word compensation. What does it mean to be compensated for something, right? It means to be paid. So you could look at this sentence: the most superlative assortment of ideas, qualities, and substances of the physical, mental, and spiritual experiences that constitute our existence are available to be granted without recompense. And if you break that down, right, we can look at this and say, well, the most superlative, the best, and then it says assortment of ideas, qualities, substances of the physical, mental, and spiritual experiences that constitute our existence. Well, that lists every possible thing, right? Ideas, qualities, substances, the physical, mental, and spiritual. Well, that's like every realm we could think of. Those are just things. That's everything. The best of everything, the best things, um, are available to be granted without recompense. I'm going to let you think about that for a second. And with each one of these, I'll also show you some images really quickly that might help you understand what the quote is trying to get at. And then, once you've seen those images, I want you to pause the screen. I'll tell you when to pause. Look at the saying and try to figure out what simple, basic saying. So, for instance, the example we've looked at here, if you haven't figured it out already, the simple idea, the familiar saying that you've probably heard before, that this is saying the same thing, is the best things in life are free. All of these different sentences that are difficult have a very simple, basic idea behind them and are sayings that you've definitely heard before. So let's try this on your own. So here we go. The act of visual apprehension of a given set of circumstances engenders in us a confident mental state that is disposed towards crediting the situation with veracity. Go ahead. Don't be intimidated by those words. Try to figure out what simple saying that you've probably heard that this is representing. I'll give you a couple of visual clues really quickly here. All right. Go ahead and pause it. See if you can figure it out, and then I'll give you the answer. Go ahead. Okay, hopefully you looked at this and you see that what it's saying, right, the act of visual apprehension, seeing of a given set of circumstances, engenders in us a confident mental state, knowing, seeing, knowing, being confident, maybe not knowing, believing, that is disposed towards crediting the situation with veracity. There's that word that maybe we're not familiar with, veracity. Some of you who may know Spanish or other languages might recognize parts of words, and that can be really helpful too. I know when I saw this word, I saw vera, and using the context clues and some other things, I recognized that as a part of a word I knew in Spanish, verdad, right, which means truth. That kind of thing. So that would help you in this instance if you knew that. So let's see if you got it correct. Seeing is believing. That's the quote behind the word. All right, let's try this again. Those who arrive on a scene prior to all other participants are those who will enjoy the privilege of favor and initial administration. Once again, don't be intimidated. Part of the purpose of this exercise is to present you with sentences that are confusing and overly complex, and to prove to you that if you really think about it, you can figure out what it's trying to say. In this case, there are two really popular sayings that you could probably get from this quote, and they basically mean the same thing, but I've done this activity a lot, and a lot of times it's one saying or the other that people come up with. So go ahead and read this. Here are your visual clues. They're not very helpful in this one. I can tell it's probably a little bit confusing. And let's go back up and look at it. Go ahead and pause it right now. Okay, hopefully you figured it out. Those who arrive on a scene prior to all other participants, the first, right, are those who will enjoy the privilege of favor and initial administration. First come, first serve. The other famous saying that you might have gotten from that kind of means the same thing, right, is the early bird gets the worm. All right. Hopefully you're doing all right. If you're not, don't freak out. It's okay. We're still trying to figure this out. So keep trying, keep going after it. Don't get intimidated. Don't quit. Here we go. It is not considered wise to place the sum total of one's ovoid food products into a solitary interwoven pannier. Definitely some words there that we may not be familiar with. I'll definitely admit to you, I did not know what ovoid meant. I knew avoid, but unfortunately that wasn't very helpful here. So go ahead, take a look at this. I'm going to give you some really good clues here. So take a look at this real quick. Okay. Go ahead and pause it. See if you can figure out what it means. Go ahead, pause right now. All right, well, hopefully you figured this out, right? Interwoven pannier, that would be a basket. Ovoid food products would be an egg, and it's not wise to place the sum total of one's eggs into a solitary interwoven pannier, to a basket. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. All right, hopefully you got that one. Let's keep trying. Let's keep trying. I like this one a lot. Atmospheric conditions are never known to produce and deliver precipitate condensation except in intense and copious profusion. Okay, think about that one for a little bit. Look at these visual clues. By the way, these visual clues aren't cheating. These visual clues are, you could think of them like in a textbook. There's pictures and graphs and things like that. You can use visuals to help you understand the meaning of a passage as well. In fact, that's a great tool to use. So take a look at these. Okay, go ahead and pause it, read this, and try to figure out what basic saying is behind it. Go ahead, pause it right now. All right, atmospheric conditions, weather, something like that, right, are never known to produce and deliver precipitate. Well, hopefully you paid attention in science class, right? Precipitation, rain, all right. Condensation, rain, right? Except in intense and copious profusion. That word copious, I had a flashback to actually one of my science classes, right? Back in the day, we had science classes just like you do now. We weren't just writing dinosaurs and things like that. But in that science class, it was a lab, and I remember the lab safety course, they always show you that eye wash, right? So like if you get some kind of crazy chemical in your eyes, you got to like put the water in your eyes so that your eyeballs don't burn out or something like that. Well, I always remember that they would say, wash copiously, and that meant a lot of. Okay, so let's see if you got it right. When it rains, it pours. All right, let's keep going. It is impossible to instruct a canine codger in unfamiliar maneuvers. All right, I like this one. Here's some visual clues. Impressive. All right, go ahead and pause it. Okay, hopefully you figured this one out. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. All right, as we head to our last example here, I want you to realize that what we're doing here is taking really purposely difficult sentences and figuring out the basic meaning. We're going to read a lot of challenging pieces of writing in this course, and certainly as you go to college and into the professional world, you're going to encounter more and more language that's elevated. And sometimes it can be really intimidating if all you're used to reading are, class books written for eighth graders. So it's important for us to realize that we can figure out the meaning of difficult words and difficult sentences. And in fact, what great readers do in college, what college professors do, what teachers do, what anybody who's a good reader does, and maybe they don't talk about it, is we all use these same tricks. We don't know every word that we read. We don't understand the exact definition, but we use things like context clues and recognizing parts of words and rereading. We use all those strategies to help us figure out things that we read. That's what great readers do. They don't just know everything, they use strategies and they work at it. That's something that you're going to need to do as well in this course and as you go on to college. So this has a real purpose. Now, the other side of this is that your writing needs to be this way as well, right? We need to be able to elevate our language in writing. We need to be able to say things in ways that are maybe a little more elevated. Now, obviously, we want to be understood, so probably not as elevated as these sentences, but we do want to be impressive with our writing. We do want academics and people who are reading it to know that we know what we're talking about and that we're serious about our topic. Most of the writing we do in here is going to be that kind of writing. So let's try this one. A slender utensil, utilized for its dye depositing qualities, is several factors more powerful than the sinuous, sharp edge handheld object employed for purpose of attack and defense. Visual clues. Go ahead and pause it and try to figure it out. Well, what is that slender utensil utilized for its dye depositing qualities? That's a pen, my friends. And if that's several factors more powerful than the sinuous, sharp-edged handheld object employed for purpose of attack and defense, that's a sword, right? The correct quote is, "The pen is mightier than the sword." Before I move on and show you what your assignment is with this activity, I want you to realize that you don't have to be intimidated by elevated language, and that in fact what we need to work to do is decoding that elevated language when we read, making it simpler in our heads, breaking it down to the basic ideas, or what we're going to call in this course the basic arguments that the author is making. And to think about it that way, you can enter into those conversations and enter into those debates and have your own say. And we also need to realize that writing in a more elevated way can impress and persuade, is a way of persuading our readers that we're knowledgeable on our topic, and that's going to be really important as well. If you had any questions about this presentation, I hope that you will write them down and either email your questions to me about this presentation, or just if you're in my class, just drop it by anytime and I'll do my best to answer those questions. Your assignment is to go through this just as we did, and I want you to now make a translation. So I'm asking you to think of a saying or slang that you or your peers use that people who don't know you might not understand. For instance, back in the early 2000s and late 90s, it was actually cool to say things were the bomb. Now, we didn't literally mean it was an explosive device. Instead, we meant that it was really cool. Looking back, that was a really bad decision because it sounds really corny. But we thought it was cool at the time, just like you probably think things like YOLO are cool now. Sorry, it's probably not going to be cool in 5 years. But what I want you to do is think of a saying like YOLO or anything like that, and I want you to think about how you could say that same idea or the same message that you're trying to get across in a way that a small child would understand. So a little small child may not know what YOLO means. How would you explain it in a really simple, basic way that they could understand? And then I want you to also think how you would communicate that same idea in a way that would be accepted in the academic world to a professor. You can't write YOLO in a paper, right? But how could you explain that idea in a way that they would accept the same idea in a legitimate way? So you want to elevate the language. What I want you to do is, it says create a poster, but all you really need to do is take like a sheet of paper is what I'm looking for, fold it into thirds, and in the middle put your original slang or saying, and on the bottom I want you to say it in the really simple childlike way, and on the top I want you to write it in the elevated way, to translate it into the more elevated language. And it would also be helpful if maybe you added some visuals to that as well and make it look real nice, because I like for things to look good and show me that you have that extra effort. I hope this lesson was helpful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you need to re-listen to different parts, please go back and do that. That's all for this lesson today.